I hope you've enjoyed the book of Job as much as I have. Just really had a great time, have had a great time in the Word and in studying a book that's kind of just out there. Nobody really knows what to do with it, but I hope that it has encouraged you and blessed you. And I hope that you can take some time to go back through it and just let Spirit speak to you again. Just keep rehearsing those things. Job was probably, more than likely, the first written word of God that we have as far as chronology is concerned. We were just getting our letters at that time. Job probably putting creation around 4,000, which is a conservative figure, but putting creation around 4,000. Noah's flood around 1,600 years after that, which would be 24. Putting Abraham right around 24 that time. Just the chronology I'm trying to remember, but puts Job right around 1900 years before Messiah. When you think about that, we're 2,000 years after Messiah right now. So he was about the same time, give or take a few hundred years, but he was about the same time before Messiah coming to the earth as we are after Messiah. And yet, when you think about that, there's so much wisdom. When we think of ancient people, that ancient people lived really great, even though they didn't have cell phones. Isn't that amazing? I think people lived longer without cell phones. But there's proof of that. It must be the cell phones that are killing us. I don't know. But, but when you think about that, and there's just so many things God is leading us into studying the book of Hebrews. And so we're going to go from Job, which is one of the first writings, because Job probably was a couple hundred years before Moses, at least. And I'm not really sure on. There's so many different, but right in there, 200 to 400 years before Moses. But it's interesting because I believe that Job was probably living the same time as Jacob was. So Jacob had moved down to Egypt, but God had raised Job up to be light in the Levant, in the Middle East, while Jacob was down in another country. And God always has people where he needs people. He doesn't leave us without that light. So just those kind of blessings. So I'm just kind of trying to bring back a little bit of what we've talked about before, just to encourage you to go back to Job. But now we're going to be in Job chapter 40. Job chapter 40, verse 15. The Bible says, "See now, Behemoth, which I made along with you, he eats grass like an ox." So he's saying, behold, now as we talked about his salvation, or the fact that we need him as our Savior last week. And now he's saying, look now at Behemoth. And there's a lot of ink spilt on what Behemoth basically is. That the word behemoth comes from the words that mean a water horse. Most commentators say the behemoth was hippopotamus. If he's not, he's a lot like the hippo. And we see that just some things about the hippopotamus that we could get, so we could get a mind, just a frame of mind. But we see the behemoth because the hippopotamus is not the largest animal. The elephant and the rhinoceros is larger than the hippo, but just his build and there's some uniqueness about a hippopotamus. For a long time, scientists thought that the hippo was related to the swine, to the pig. But then as they learn their DNA, we see that the hippopotamus is more related to the whale and the dolphin, which is very interesting. The hippo, of course, if you remember pictures, his head is huge, just like the rhino and the elephant, just very huge. We take a look at his head. His nostrils are very large, wide, far apart, not like the crocodile. His eyes are bulgy, so because he lives in the water. In fact, he could come up for air. He could breathe several minutes. There's differences of opinion as far as the minutes go, but several minutes underwater, anywhere from 6 minutes to 40 minutes has been suggested, which is a long time. But as we look at the hippo, we see that it's very comfortable in the water. It doesn't swim because it weighs several tons. It doesn't swim, but it just goes down under the water and walks around. And then when it needs air, it just walks out of the water and it comes up just high enough to where its nostrils can get the air that it needs, and its eyeballs, and he can look around and see what's going on, and then go back down in the water. So they live a lot in the water. We see that they mate in the water. We see that they give birth in the water, more in the reeds or in the swampy area, but they will have their young in the water, but they nurse their young in the water. So they really enjoy the water, their mouth opens up just incredibly wide, just like an alligator, but opens up its mouth. And a lot of times it'll be just standing underwater with its mouth open, waiting for a fish to swim in. And then it has incredible speed when it closes its mouth. It has sharp teeth, like razor sharp teeth in the front, and has a couple canine teeth that are huge tusks. In fact, sometimes they are poached for their tusks. But their diet then is fish, and as we see here, that they also eat grass, and they have real rough lips, and so when they're up on the land and eating the grass, their lips actually will chop off the grass, and then their teeth will chew it up. They don't chew their cud, but they do eat grass, and I think they do have 2 or 3 stomachs, but they don't chew their cud like a cow does. Anything else? So we walk around, and then we take a look at the side of the hippo, and we see he's very stout in nature. And we see in verse 16, it says, "See now his strength is in his loins." So typically, like if you look at a cow, you see the loins in front of their rump, and we see that that's a narrowing. In fact, the word loins means a narrowing, like your waist. But the hippo is much like our waist, many of our waists. It's not as narrow as what it used to be. And so we see that the hippo, if you look at, you see that he looks kind of proportionally, it looks kind of light in the front. And then from behind his front legs, it just broadens out. And we see that he's very, very stout in his stomach, and his strength is in his loins. So his loins are not narrow like we see in other animals, but he's very, very strong, very powerful, very solid in his loins. Something else here, like the elephant, even though the elephant's bigger than the hippo, we see that the elephant is very vulnerable in its stomach, and that like a lion or a rhinoceros or whatever can attack an elephant, and they go after the soft flesh in an elephant's stomach, where the hippopotamus doesn't have that. The hippopotamus is very strong. His loins are very solid. The power or the energy, the word here power means energy, and the energy or his ability is in his stomach muscles. So he's very strong in his stomach muscles, and the word muscles is ropes. And so like the ropes of his stomach are very strong. And so then we walk around to his backside as we're taking a look at him. In verse 17, it says he bends his tail like a cedar. Now, typically you wouldn't think of a tree as an analogy of something bending. But, in South Dakota with 55-mile-an-hour winds, we see cedar trees bending. So it's kind of interesting. But the idea of bending is very interesting, as we see the hippopotamus actually uses his tail in a flipping motion. It's very stiff, solid. It is very solid, like a tree branch, not like the tail of a cow that can be batted back and forth, swatting flies and so forth. It's kind of a short tail, but he uses his tail as a manure spreader. And so when he is voiding, usually up on the banks of the pond or the lake or wherever he's at, he will swish his tail in almost like a complete circular motion to spread his waist. And so he spreads his waist. He doesn't leave it like we see in buffalo chips. But he spreads his waist, which is kind of an interesting thing, why he would decide to do that. But at any rate, but his tail is just stiff, but it does bend. And as the Bible says here, the sinews or the tendons of his thighs are knit together. So we see it is very stout. We see his stomach muscles are very stout, and his tendons and his thighs are knit together. Now, the King James says stones, and the Strong's Concordance defines the word for thighs as testicles. And we know that the testicles on a hippopotamus are hidden. They're not like the buffalo or the cows, or the bulls, I should say, but they are hidden. And so they're very protected. So, they don't leave any part of their body to vulnerability. They're very aggressive. They're not predators. They don't eat meat unless, once in a while, if there's a kill, they might snack on it or something like that. But they are very ferocious. They will kill a crocodile. Crocodiles are an enemy, live in the same water, but crocodiles will kill a young hippopotamus. And so hippopotami are very aggressive animals. And in fact, they'll run, and they can run like 18, 19, 20 miles an hour. And there are times when they're running that all of their feet are off the ground. They're just like their muscles, just so much power. It's like there's not another animal where they just so much of a percentage of their body is powerful. They're not the animal that you want to just take a stroll and, walk up there. There's probably signs out there someplace that says hippopotamuses are dangerous. So, you don't want to walk up and try to pet one. They are a nuisance because of their size. They eat a lot of grass. They'll eat 80, 90 pounds of grass a day. And so people that are trying to raise cattle or sheep around groups of hippopotami, which could be in the hundreds, they can devastate the land very rapidly. So they are a nuisance, but they are, like I said, they're very powerful creatures. And if this is talking about something more of an ancient nature, it still would have a lot of the characteristics of a hippopotamus. Now we go into verse 18. His bones are like the tubes of bronze. And it's interesting because Job lived right in the middle of the Bronze Age. You have the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. And we determine the ages by, even though iron was available during this time, we did not have the ability to melt the iron. We didn't have the kilns available that would get the iron hot enough to be able to melt it. So we haven't quite got into the Iron Age. The Bronze Age held out quite a while, especially around the Middle East, around the Mediterranean era. We see copper was available. We know that copper was mined in prehistoric times. And then when we were able to heat the copper up and melt it and then add tin with the copper, then that's what gives us the bronze or the brass. So now he's explaining here that the hippo has bones or a structure, a body is like tubes of brass. And then he goes on, he says, and the bones, his ribs, or it's another word for bones, but his ribs, more of the skeleton, are like bars of iron. And so this iron here would not have been the smelted iron, but it would have been beaten iron. And so he's illustrating again the strength. So we see that this animal is all force, all power, protected, an animal that some are in captivity, but most of the time, if you're going to see a hippopotamus, you would have to go to Africa, the Congo, Egypt, and so forth, where there's a lot of water, and be able to see it. I believe that it's very possible that people close to Job, if Job hasn't seen the hippo himself, people close to him have certainly seen the hippopotamus. And then in verse 19, he is the beginning of the ways of Ale. His maker brings near his sword. Now, this is an incredible verse. And if we break it down, we see that the word Reshit, he is the Reshit. The word's translated beginning. It means first, or the chief. The first word of the Bible is Bereshit, in the beginning, Bereshit. And so we see that God is talking, by the way. God is talking in these verses to Job. And so God is saying that the behemoth is the beginning or the first of the ways of El, or Elohim, of God. Now, if you've ever, you've seen pictures of hippopotamus, just such a beautiful creature, isn't he? So attractive. I mean, do you wake up in the morning and think, man, I just wish I could look like a hippo? But we see here that God is making a connection as he's been using the animal kingdom in these chapters to illustrate himself or to illustrate certain parabolic truths. But we see here that he's saying this is the beginning. This is the beginning of Ale. In other words, this is the chief. This is the chief of Ale. This is when you think of Elohim, when you think of God, if you're looking for a word picture or if you're looking for an image, when you think of God, think of the hippopotamus. Wow. Now that seems weird to us, because we want to see God as, as the lion, for instance, which we see that the lion is definitely used in the scriptures to recognize Messiah. But as we see here, he says, I want you to get a good picture of your God. I want you to see your God. If you take a look when you get home, take a look at it in the Wikipedia at the hippopotamus and take a look and just see how stout he is and how even though he doesn't have the same tough hide as a rhino does, but he just is still just impenetrable. And so, but God wants us to recognize that he is El Shaddai. He is almighty. He's almighty. We need to recognize Elohim as the mighty God, the mighty God. He is the beginning of ways. Now, punctuation is not in the original. Translators will put punctuation in different places. But it says here, his maker brings near or approaches near, causes to come near, his sword. The word sword is actually from a word that means drought or like the cutting or tools that are used to cut or to harvest, a sword, a cutting instrument. And so as we look at this, we see that his maker brings near his sword. And so we could go along a lot of different directions on this. The capital letter in our text, his sword, shows us that the translators were assuming that the sword belonged to God. Okay, so let's take that route real quickly. And we see that the dinosaurs, as we see the dinosaurs in archaeology, and by the way, they're making discoveries about dinosaurs continually. We would think that they would know everything about dinosaurs by now, but they're making new strides in that. But the fact is, getting back to the hippo, that the dinosaurs continued to grow. You know, they didn't come to an adult age where they were just that same size all the time, but they just continued to grow and grow and grow until they outgrew their food. They outgrew their habitat. And so they would just come to a place where they would die. They would multiply, and there'd be too many of them. You could read like the book of Enoch and so forth and see other things that were taking place that caused problems for dinosaurs. But it seems like God is saying here, or could be saying, that the hippo reached the point where God cut him off, didn't kill him, but stopped him from getting any bigger, needing to move out of his comfort zone, and he could continue to live, multiply for generations. I mean, the hippopotamus has never been to a place where the species was in danger of becoming extinct. There's no problem at all with the number of hippos that are on the earth today. They're taking care of themselves. There's plenty of food for them and all of those things. Okay, but it seemed like the dinosaurs just kind of outgrew themselves. And so this could be speaking about here. We talked about his grazing habits. Maybe the hippo was used by God sometimes to bring drought or to bring chastisement to the people, that when they weren't doing right, maybe the hippos would become a plague to them, and their teeth, which were actually called swords. The word for sword is also cherub, where we get the word cherubim, which is the cherubim, and the angel, the messenger with the sword in the Garden of Eden. So as you think about the sword, you think about the cherubim, you think about, the Tzevaot, the army of God. And so God maybe used the hippopotamus as a means of bringing plague or chastisement against people who were not following him. So there are different opinions. You could have your own. So we see here, it could read, he is the beginning. He's the Reshit of the ways, the Derek. He is the beginning of the ways of El, his maker. You could use, because there's no punctuation here, there's no conjunction between El and his maker, which is a participle. So you could say, he is the beginning of the ways of El, his maker, bringing near or approaching his sword. And so we see, as we look at God then, if he's using the hippo as an illustration of God's characteristics, then we see that God is a God that is strong. He's also a God that judges. He's a God that contains, that puts boundaries. So you could just meditate on that and see the different characteristics of the Almighty using this animal. In verse 20 then, it says, for the mountains yield food for him. Mountains in the Bible is just raised areas. We think of mountains, like the Rocky Mountains, but the mountains, raised area. Of course, the mountains do supply water, and water is a big deal for the hippo. And so we also see that mountains produce a lot of grass. And so if they're close to a mountain, then as they would go and wander about eating the grass from the mountains, for the mountains yield food for him. So food is supplied for him, and all the beasts are the living creatures, would be the same word here used for cattle, beasts, the living creatures. The beasts of the field play there. So we see here that as long as the cows leave the hippo alone, they're going to be fine. If the hippopotamus thinks that the cow's going to eat that blade of grass that he wants, there might be a problem. But at any rate, we see that there is an order of things and that there's community that lives together, even in diversity. And so if you can see a picture of the hippo living in a swamp or in a pond or a lake, stream, river area, and then you see other beasts, the antelope and the deer and the cattle and the buffalo and so forth, living also in the field, in the spread that's there where we find the grain, the grass is growing. All right, so we see that they intermingle, that they live in the same area. And as I think about that, I think, isn't it wonderful that God lives with us? What a blessing it is. What a blessing it is to know that the Almighty God lives with us. He dwells with us. There's one thing about our Messiah, the Son of God, how that he came and dwelt with us. He actually walked on this earth. He tabernacled among us. And what a blessing. And so even though he is so powerful, he still allows us to live in the same field with him. And he offers up a relationship that we can have with him. Even though he's out of our league, he still wants to be around us. And that's an incredible truth there. Then verse 22, it says, the slender trees cover him. The lotus trees, probably the lotus trees, the slender trees cover him like a covert. The slender tree, the lotus, by the way, is a tree that its fruit causes drowsiness. So I can just see it as a hippo comes out of the water and is looking for shade and so forth. He finds the tree that when he eats the fruit, it makes him drowsy and he gets his afternoon nap, But the slender trees cover him with their shade. The willows, which are many willows around the area there in the Middle East, the willows by the stream surround him. And so we see that he knows how to relax. He knows how to find what he needs. It's a picture in my mind right now. It's a picture of not being anxious. The opposite of anxiety, the opposite of being anxious. And, as we look at God, God is a God who he doesn't get anxious. He knows things are in his control and he's not afraid of anything. And so he's not anxious about anything. He's not going to mess up by making a bad choice or making a mistake. He's not going to get ahead of himself. He's not filled with anxiety. He's able to relax. What a blessing. And we see that with our Shabbat, that after 6 days of creation, the seventh day, God rested. He rested on the seventh day and hallowed it. And what a blessing it is that every week we celebrate Shabbat and that rest. So God is in control. He can relax. He's got this, okay? And so the picture of this awesome beast, that finds his shade tree and eats the fruit and lays down and rests and relaxes, and just a symbol of peace. I don't know how it would go if you're looking for a way to, promote symbols of God. Now we can go back even before we had writings, before we had the written format to write down our languages. We go back and there are statues in different areas where the gods are represented by a head of a hippopotamus. But you might be able to, if you start making jewelry with the head of a hippo on it, and, you could have, maybe it'd replace a cross, instead of a pennant of a cross, you'd have a pennant of a hippopotamus. I don't know. It might work. You never know. So we see his peace. Then in verse 23, I love this. See, if the river rages, if the river flows like it's angry in anger, if the river rages, he is not alarmed. He feels safe, which means there's security, trustworthiness. He feels safe. Even at the Jordan, I don't know if there were hippos in the Jordan River or not, but we know that Job and his friends lived around close to the Jordan River, and so they could use this. Job could understand what God is saying to him. And he says, even if the Jordan River, the Jordan, gushes into his mouth. Okay, so here's the hippo standing in the middle of the Jordan River with his mouth open, waiting for that trout. And all of a sudden, the Jordan River begins to flood. And there he is. And if the river is just gushing into his mouth, and then it says, before his eyes or in his eyes shall he be caught with snares or his nose pierced. Now, he's not going to be caught with snares and his nose pierced. I mean, unless you have a really good hypodermic needle, that's not going to happen. But if you look at this, what he's describing a picture of a bad day. So here he's in the middle of the Jordan, cooling off, doing a little fishing, and all of a sudden a wall of water comes gushing and just gushes right into his mouth. But he just what? If it gushes in his mouth, that means that he's facing it head on. He's facing it head on. He's not afraid of the flood. He's facing it. He's not alarmed. He's secure. He's still trustworthy. He's still confident. And in his eyes, if there's trash in the river because of people that were fishing upstream, if there's trash in the river, even if in his eyes he gets caught by a nose-piercing snare, that would be kind of a bad day. You know, it's kind of like taking your kids fishing, and the first time they cast, they catch your ear. You know, have you been there or catch your clothes or something? Then you decide, well, let's not go fishing anymore. But you think so? He's just describing. I think God is just describing something. Maybe Job had that trouble when he was raising his kids. I don't know. But God is showing us how powerful he is, how that he is the beginning. In other words, he's the chief picture of his strength and of his ability to take care of us and to take care of this world. He said the mountains as well as the valleys yield food. We cohabitate with the Almighty. What a blessing. All of these things. This is our God. This is our God. And that's what he was giving to Job. He was showing Job that this is who I am. Now, as we go on further, we go into the next chapter, and in Job chapter 41, it says, would you draw Leviathan? And in the Hebrew, it's Li-Yathan. It's hard to pronounce. Pronounce a word with an I-W. How do you pronounce I-W? I don't know how you do that, but in our scriptures translation, it has L-I-W, and I don't know how to pronounce L-I-W. Liu. I can't do that with my American tongue. I can't do it. It ends up coming Lou, or leave. So we go with leave. Okay, so let's just go Leviathan, and we'll be fine with that. All right. But so here's another creature. And he says, would you draw Leviathan with hooks? Now think of a crocodile. And we'll be talking about this more in the weeks ahead. But think of a crocodile. A crocodile, you all know what a crocodile, alligator crocodile. You've been at, reptile gardens or whatever. And so think of a crocodile. Crocodiles can get up to 30 feet long, short legs, huge jaw. What are some things about crocodile? A narrow head. The teeth on a crocodile, when his jaw is closed, the teeth alternate, and his teeth are visible. All of the teeth of the crocodile are visible when his mouth is shut. And so you can think of a crocodile. But as we read on, we see that this isn't a crocodile. It's like, this is bigger than a crocodile, because it says, would you draw out, would you catch, or would you be able to pull out of a pond the crocodile, Leviathan, if it's a crocodile with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line, which you lowered into the water? And so immediately we say, well, this is more than a crocodile. And as we read through, if you could take an image of like a crocodile, add that with the biggest snake that you've ever seen, put wings on him, and if you think about the pictures, maybe some of the pictures that you might have seen about dragons, and we think of dragons as being a mythical character, which dragons are used in mythology quite a bit. But the thing is that we're finding, even back in like 2020, archaeologists found skeletons of dinosaurs that had wings, like bats. Only these are huge animals with wings. They found dinosaurs where there are fossils of feathers, where they see feathers that clothed the dinosaurs like the ostrich. Now, I don't know that the wings on the dinosaur could actually lift him up, but he would be able to soar. If he jumped off a cliff or used the wings, like he could jump from one cliff to another, much like the flying squirrel. But we see this also, it's possible to breathe fire, and we know that that's possible. There's a beetle that actually breathes fire, and you think about, this is kind of getting base, but you think about gases that develop within us because of our digestive system breaking down bacteria. There are certain words that come to your mind at this point. But as we think about that, these gases are flammable, and it is dangerous in working around these gases, like in septic systems and so forth. And so it doesn't take too much of an imagination to see that it's possible for a creature to actually have fire and smoke coming out of the nostrils. And we also have images back from pre-writing days, thousands of years ago, but we have pictures of kings where they are beside fire-breathing dragons. And so we know that those things are possible. So if you can, in your mind, think of Leviathan. And so that's what God is saying is, would you draw Leviathan? Now, we can also think of Leviathan as being the dragon creature that surrounded the known world, that was in the waters as seamen would go out into the waters, and there'd be this huge dragon creature. We also know that the largest constellation in the Northern Hemisphere is the dragon. And there are times at night, at a certain time at night, where the entire constellation can be seen right above the horizon. And so the largest constellation is the dragon. And so just think about the largest, baddest creature that has ever been known to humanity. Would you draw out Leviathan with a hook or snare his tongue? Think of a serpent and their tongue, as they'd stick their tongue out for cooling themselves or controlling their body heat. Next time you see a dragon, try roping his tongue, okay? See how that goes for you. Okay, can you do that? Of course not. You can't snare his tongue with a line that you throw out. In verse 2, it says, would you put a cord? This is more of like a grass rope through his nose, so you can run a rope through one nostril and then bring it back through another nostril and tie it. And just awesome beasts can be controlled that way. led around. A bull can be controlled by a ring in his nose. He said, would you do that to this creature? He's saying, no, you wouldn't do that. Would you pierce his jaw with a hook? His jaw is cheek. Would that be of any benefit to you? Would he keep on pleading with you, supplicating with you? Would he say, oh, please don't do that anymore? You're hurting me. I'm very uncomfortable at this point. Can you see a dragon saying that to you? Would he speak softly to you? Tenderly, softly, tenderly to you? Verse 4, would he make a covenant? The word make here means to covenant. So would he covenant a covenant with you? To be taken as a servant. Now we know that if you're going to be a servant in the Torah, you say, yes, I'll be your servant for the rest of my life. That they would take an awl, a punch, and make a hole. They pierce your ear and then put an emblem or something that would show that you were this particular person's servant for the rest of your life. He said, can you imagine the Leviathan, this serpent, dragon, beast, to be taken as your servant? Verse 5, would you play with him? Just like we played with the hippopotamus, or in the field next to the hippopotamus. Would you play with him as with a bird? A lot of birds you could take and you could train, and little birds that you could play with. Would you play with him as with a bird? Or leash him? Would you tie him with a cord for your young girls, for your maidens to play with or to have as pets? We're talking about Leviathan here, by the way. No, that would be silly. That would be crazy to even think of. Would partners in business bargain over him or open him up for bargain? Would they divide him? The word divide means to cut him in half. Would they cut him in half? Would the merchants, would they divide him among the merchants? The word merchants is Canaan, which we get the word Canaan from. The Canaanites were merchant people. And so he says, would they divide him among the merchants? Would you go out there and, let's go slay a dragon today, make a little money? It's kind of beyond our imagination, right? Would you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears, clamoring? These are just weapons that were recognized because the weapons were put into or carried in a fashion where as the soldiers would walk, they would make a clanging sound. You think of the shields, the spears, swords, things like that. And that's why this comes to be the fishing spears. But would you fill his skin? I mean, his skin, as we'll see later on in verses, would you fill his head with spears? Now, we could do that with an alligator, and that's what we're seeing here. This creature is much larger, bigger than what we can even imagine. Put your hand on him, the palm of your hand. Think, or the word here is remember, Zakar. Remember the struggle. It's almost like Job had an experience of putting his hand in the wrong place. Maybe he did that fishing thing. What do they call that? Where they stick their hand in the river or something? And doodling. What is it? Doodling, yeah, doodling. Maybe Job had an experience where he got his hand in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know, but it's like God was bringing this up. But he said, remember or think of the struggle. Think of the struggle. Do not do it again. Sounds like our mother, right? Do not do that again. See, verse 9, any expectation, any hope of him is beyond thought, is disappointing. To trust him. There's no way to trust in Leviathan. There's nothing about him, about his creature, about his mass, his strength, about his soul. There's nothing about him that would in any way desire to be tamed or to work alongside of anyone else. Total destruction is represented by Leviathan. If you have any hope in him, you're going to be disappointed. We're going to see how that Leviathan is a picture of Hasatan. And people are always putting their hope in Satan. And he's not the creature to put your hope in. He's going to disappoint you. He might paint you a beautiful picture and give you all kinds of hope. But in the end, there's destruction. Yeah, man. You got to leave Leviathan alone. See, any expectation of him is disappointed. He is laid low, even at the sight of him. And speaking of anyone who would see a dragon would be laid down, okay, like passed out or something like that. No one is so foolhardy. Nobody has the thought, the imagination, the motivation. No one is so foolhardy as to wake him up. But then God ends with this. Who then is able to stand against me? If you cannot stand against Hasatan, why would you think that you could stand against God? Isn't it so much better to be on God's side? Yeah, man. So much better. So many people that we meet, so many people that cross our paths, that come to stay with us, that become envious of our little corner, which is so simple. I mean, it's a campground, it's not a resort or anything like that. It's just a campground. But, people look at it. People come on our property and they make statements like it's just so peaceful here. Amen. Just so peaceful. And we know that the Spirit is here. Yeah, and we know he protects us. There's not a chain link fence around the property. God watches over us. And there are people that just sometimes in a little way become envious. And it's nothing that we have done. It's just, it's God. If they sense anything at all, it's all God. Yeah, man. But it's almost like, you know what? You could have it too. You could have it too. You could have your place where the Spirit of God is. You could have your home. You could have your house. You could have your tabernacle. Come on, brother. Filled with the Spirit of God. Yeah. And have the blessings of God, just like we have been able to experience here. It's for everyone. We don't need to be jealous of one person or another. He offers the same blessings. Read Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. He blesses those who bless us, and he curses those who curse us. And the word curse here means to belittle, to look less valuable at. And when somebody looks down on you, God is looking down on them. Come on. God blesses those who bless you. Yeah. And he curses those who curse you. Isn't that great? Yeah, man. Isn't that great? Is there something here that you can grab a hold of? Yeah. Something that can help you and keep you going, when it's stormy and when you're tired of listening to the wind blowing. God is so good. So good. And Satan is a criminal. He is a liar. He's a deceiver. And as we go through the next chapter and finish out these declarations that God makes, I hope that we'll just be reminded that there's no place, should not be any place for Hasatan in our lives. God is offering us the kingdom. We just need to receive it, to walk in it. And let him be king. Let him be king. And I think that's a better image. You think of a hippopotamus, think of God. If you think of God, think of a king, okay? I think that's a little bit better. But quite the illustration that God gave to Job.